Welcome once again. It is just after 12 o'clock on this lovely Wednesday. It finally cooled down after the state fair. It was a hot one out there last week, and I'm super excited. Our fall schedule is underway with this program. So our 128th program, and we got Morgan and Craig joining us today, a couple of DNR staff that are familiar with crossbow hunting. I'm just going to turn it over to you, Craig, if you want to introduce Morgan and go from there.
So I'm Craig Kiger. I work with shooting sports in the outreach section, and we got the recording started. Good. Um, I've been a crossbow hunter for about 6 years now, and I came to crossbow hunting because of a shoulder injury, my left shoulder, and I realized that I wasn't able to draw a bow. So that's how I got started. It's been a lot of fun to get back out in the woods. I have harvested 2 deer now. Nothing to hang on the wall, just meat to fill a freezer. And that's one of the main reasons that I hunt, is to know where my food comes from. So Morgan, we'll turn it over to you. Tell the folks a little bit about you. This is Morgan's very first episode, so please give her a warm welcome.
Hi, y'all. I'm Morgan Sussman. I'm one of the public information coordinators with the Minnesota DNR Fish and Wildlife Division. And I've also been crossbow hunting for, I think, since 2019 at this point. And this is actually my crossbow featured in the photo here that you can see on screen. And I've harvested a couple deer. You'll see one featured a little bit later in this PowerPoint, so just a little spoiler alert there. But yeah, so excited to talk to y'all a little bit about this. And yeah, I started hunting a little bit later in life, not until college. None of my family really hunts, or at least anybody that's still alive. So a little bit of a different background there.
So, and you started crossbow hunting in a state that was open for everybody.
Yes, I started crossbow hunting in Indiana. So this photo here is actually from Indiana.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, do we want to kick it off?
Yep, let's go ahead.
All right, awesome. And there we go. So just to kind of give everybody a rundown of what the regs currently are in Minnesota, the regulations were updated this year, post-legislative session earlier this spring. So now any hunter who purchases an archery deer license may take deer with a crossbow throughout the archery deer season. Previously, you had to have a disability permit, or you had to be, I believe it was 65 or 64 or older, in order to use a crossbow legally, or you could use it only during the firearms season. So in addition to this, so that's for deer season, crossbows are also allowed for spring archery, wild turkey, fall turkey, and bear seasons. The regulations surrounding the crossbows themselves is they must be shoulder fired, deliver at least 42 foot-pounds of energy at 10 feet, have bolts or arrows at least 10 inches long, and have a working safety. So we just want to start this off by addressing some of the controversy that we've been hearing from folks surrounding crossbows and this recent legislative proposal going through and being enacted into law for this season. So we've been hearing from folks, especially within the bow hunting community, that this is a pretty big change for them, especially since crossbows aren't vertical bows. And there's some concern about how this could potentially negatively impact the Minnesota's deer herd. So we do want to address that, in that, we've consulted other states to see kind of how crossbow regulations have affected their total deer harvest for the season. And what typically they end up seeing is a gradual increase in harvest during the archery season. And it's a little bit more during the archery season, but the overall total deer harvest isn't as impacted. The impact is pretty minimal. And so what that's suggesting is that it tends to be kind of compensatory. So you see maybe some vertical bow hunters switch to using crossbows, or you see some firearms deer hunters switch to hunting the archery season by using crossbows. So it's not necessarily a huge draw for new hunters to come in and harvest more deer than usual. It's kind of just shifting around where the harvest happens during the season. So that's what we've been seeing with other states, but rest assured that we are going to be very closely monitoring how this impacts our season. Minnesota's a different state, it could have different effects. And so we're going to be really closely monitoring the deer harvest and adjusting regulations as necessary. Um, the other question we've been receiving a lot is just, why are we allowing crossbows during the archery season? Some folks are of the opinion that they're not really bows, like that is reserved for vertical bows. And we just want to clarify that for like for your information, this proposal was not put forth by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. This actually came about through the state legislature. So, how some of our laws and rules are enacted, it doesn't always come from the managing agency. There's multiple ways that a rule can go into effect, and this is one of those proposals that was through the state legislature. So, that's also why there wasn't a public input period, is because it wasn't actually like a proposal that came through us. We usually have public input periods whenever we are the one putting forth the proposal, but since this didn't come from us, we didn't have that option. So again, we do intend to monitor the effects of this rule and, look into changing the rules as necessary once we've got some of that data after this season. So we will definitely be making that available at the end of the season and kind of letting people, how it went down and everything. But just so you're aware, there are several other states that have allowed crossbows during archery season for years now. Wisconsin, Indiana, Michigan are just a few. So if this is something that you're really passionate about and something that you really want to look into, I highly recommend going on some of those other natural resource agency deer harvest breakdowns, because you can actually see how much hunters are harvesting in comparison to previous years with crossbows, and kind of get an idea of what we might expect for this season. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Craig to talk a little bit more about the history behind crossbows.
So in the research I did to put this together, crossbows date back to the 4th century BC, 6,500 years ago. It was a straight piece of wood with a lever for releasing the arrow. And I believe the one drawing there is possibly Da Vinci's. I'm not sure. Those are handheld units. The drawing was actually a field unit, and the bolts were 4 to 6 feet in length. And the reason they called it a bolt was because that big shaft came out of the sky like a bolt of lightning and would hit the embankments of military. So that's how the name bolt got started. And a bolt is just a short arrow. Today we have modern crossbows. They shoot much faster, easier to load and unload. And we've got 3 of them at home now. And each time we buy one, the technology seems to get better and simpler to use. So go ahead to the next slide. So the bolts are made from aluminum, carbon fiber. Fletchings could be natural feathers or plastic vanes. The ones that I have in the office today are plastic vanes. And they're very strong material. They're very rigid in flight so that they shoot true to their point of aim. The crossbow that I have, I practice at 20 yards quite a bit. That's my preferred distance. But every once in a while, I'll shoot a 30 and 40 yard target just to see how I'm doing. And my personal rule is if I can't keep 4 out of 5 arrows in a paper plate at whatever distance, then I got to back up and shoot the shorter distance. So it's not increasing my effective range dramatically, but the learning curve is considerably better. With a vertical bow, I would practice all summer long to be ready for fall. With the crossbow, I can go out and shoot a few hours, a few weekends, and I'm pretty much ready to go. And it's an amazing tool. My wife's been using one for longer than I have, and I just, like I said, picked it up a few years ago and started hunting with it. So let's go on to the next slide. So crossbows come in many different weight, or arrows come in different weights. from a lightweight to a standard weight to a heavyweight, and you kind of judge the weight of that arrow based on the animal that you're going after. A standard weight arrow would be fine for hunting whitetails, and most of the hunting points that I have seen come in that 100 grain weight. You can get 100 grain field arrow tips for your practicing. If you shoot a practice broadhead into a target, it kind of shreds them up a little bit. So I just use the field points. And once you get your bow zeroed in, you can transfer from your practice point over to your hunting point. And in modern times, like I said before, carbon fiber is probably your choice. There was some aluminum ones out there for quite a while, and they're very strong. And shafts come in a varying degree of stiffness, referred to as the spine. I'm not really sure what spine that we're shooting on our arrows, but they seem to do really well on deer. If I was going to hunt bear, I might go up to a little bit heavier shaft because it's going to give me better pass-through penetration. So next slide. So we got a number of different types of broadheads. I don't know if I can show the broadhead on the screen today, if it's going to disappear in the picture. Yeah, it kind of disappears. So the one I was holding up is the center picture. That's just a regular fixed blade. The one that I have on this is a practice G5 type broadhead. So it's all rigid. They tend to hone up real nice, and you want to take and sharpen those type of broadheads before you go out in the field. Just because they come from the manufacturer with a nice shiny edge doesn't mean that they're perfectly sharp. The two arrows in the upper, or broadheads in the upper photos, the one is a Rage and the orange one is a Raven, and they both work on the slip. So you can see that the one on the red broadhead, they open up so they'll look like the one in the orange, and that's going to give you up to a 2-inch entry. Same with a vertical bow. They go through a deer very nice and leave a good blood trail. So I've gone to mechanicals. I haven't had any issues with them. I know I've read some articles where people have had issues with mechanical broadheads, but use what you can find locally. Use what you're comfortable with that flies true. There was a type of broadhead that we tried early on, and it was a fixed 2-blade, and the wind actually would affect that arrow or bolt on its way to the target. So we stopped using those and went to the mechanical ones. And I've had good results with those. So next slide. I really enjoy hunting from a ground blind. When I was doing a lot of rifle hunting, I would set an elevated stand. And with the crossbow, I like setting on the ground. It's just a lot more equipment to try and maneuver around in a ladder stand. The ground blinds are 5x5 roughly, and there's plenty of room for a nice comfortable chair. You can bring a little lunch with you, and my wife's actually come out and sat with me in the blind just to get out and see more deer. You can adjust the openings so you got a bigger shooting window. They control your scent pretty good, and if you wear a darker colored fabric, that black, you just blend right into that background and the deer don't see you back there. So the next stand, our next picture should be the stand. I really like the 2-person stands if I'm going to go out. I'm kind of a big guy and I fill up a 1-person stand really easy, and just having room for all of the extra gear that you bring with you in the field. Might be a small day pack, my crossbow, I'll take off the quiver and set that in the stand so I don't have all that extra weight out in front. But the 2-person I find way more comfortable. We've got all 2-person ladder stands, and it just works really well for us. So check those out. They're a little more expensive, but way more room in the stand for you. Oh, next slide. All right, you got it.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So I'm just going to go over a little bit of kind of the perks of doing the actual on the ground crossbow hunting now that we've kind of gone through kind of the nitty gritty details of the crossbows themselves. So there's a lot of perks to having the ability to hunt the archery season. I've found that it's definitely warmer, more comfortable conditions, so you're not dealing with kind of that intense cold that we get sometimes in November. So that can be really nice and also make it a lot easier to shoot because then you're not like shivering as you're trying to aim. Definitely the longer season's a huge perk. You know, it's September 16th through December 31st this year. So that's a lot more time to get in those hours that you need in order to actually get a shot at a deer. You know, some of us are lucky and we might see a deer within an hour, but if you're anything like me, it takes a few days at minimum before you even see anything. And I think it's also really nice that you kind of get to experience some different deer behavior than in the firearm season. So if you're hunting in the early season, you're hunting before the rut's happening, and you might get a little bit of that pre-rut behavior. The does and the bucks are acting a little bit differently, especially in the different age classes. So that's kind of unique, and you have to kind of plan accordingly when you're scouting. But the other perks with hunting with a crossbow is just that they're really light. And the lighter equipment is like super useful for increased maneuverability. So I'll kind of show you in this next slide, but one of the big reasons that I got into crossbow hunting is I also gun hunt as well. But the crossbow is pretty much the only weapon that I'm able to hold comfortably and still get really accurate shots with. I find that for firearms, I tend to really need to lean against something in order to get a really stable shot. And so that's been like a huge perk for this. And it's a lot easier to just get into like kind of weird positions if you're doing spot and stock hunting or even just up in a tree stand and you have to kind of get into a weird angle. And the other perk with it is, unlike with vertical bows, where you may need to spend an entire summer to really get good at it in order to make an accurate like kill shot, um, it requires a pretty similar amount of practice as to what I would compare to with like firearms training before the hunting season. I usually only get out like a couple times practicing with my crossbow, and I also don't have to go find a range that I rifle hunt. So I don't have to go find a range that's like 100 yards. I'm kind of have the ability to go to a lot of different outdoor ranges in order to practice with this, or just, you know, shoot on private property that doesn't require a lot of space. So in terms of perks, it's traditional archery equipment takes a lot more skill than it does to hunt with a crossbow, for sure. So other perks with this is just early fall hunting in general. So the deer aren't in the rut yet, but they may be acting a little bit squirrely. So this buck that I took on the right here was actually chasing a doe when I saw him, and it was a little doe fawn, but they didn't really seem to know what they were doing. Like they weren't as like interested as usual. So you might get a little bit of that squirrely behavior, but I found like the big thing to plan for is those food sources. So the tree that I was hunting out of was an oak tree, and the acorns in particular were a huge draw for the deer. And the only reason I actually got a really clear shot at him was because he got closer to the acorns. When he was chasing the doe, he was further away and he was out of range for me, but the acorns drew him in. The other big perk to like this early fall hunting with crossbows is just that or just in general early fall hunting, is that deer, especially does, aren't as weary during like early fall or flighty compared to the gun season. You know, they don't have like a lot of noise going off. They haven't been shot at several times. They're just not as weary, and that makes it a lot easier to hunt them. It's also just a gorgeous time to experience fall color, and also just like animals moving about trying to get those last calories in before winter. So it's a really beautiful time to be out, and I highly recommend taking advantage of it. So just a few tips post hunting experience. If you have the ability to, if you're hunting on private property, or you have the ability to kind of set up your stand for comfort, I highly recommend installing a hook. So even if you're hunting out of like a two-person stand, it can be kind of difficult to like maneuver around because you're going to at some point need to adjust or like get out your lunch or like rifle through your pack or whatever. I found that just having a hook to be able to hang up your crossbow can be really helpful, just to get it out of the way, but also have it secure. Because I'm like deathly afraid of like dropping my crossbow when I'm up off the ground. So that can be really helpful. And then also just practice shooting from multiple positions, because you never know what kind of position you're going to shoot in. If you're always like shooting from like the most optimal position, you're not going to be prepared when you get a shot opportunity. So for example, in this top picture here, I was actually sitting in a stand that had 3 different trunks. So the crossbow was on one, I had one directly behind me, and there was another next to my other shoulder. The buck came around the back of me, so I literally had to stand up in the stand, pull the crossbow around that trunk, and shoot over my shoulder. Um, and the only reason I was probably able to make that shot is because I had practiced shooting in all different kinds of positions. Um, you may have noticed also that that deer, he was also quartering away on top of this, but I was able to make like a clean kill from 30 yards because of that practice. So highly recommend doing that. Really, regardless of any equipment, just practice from multiple positions. But with crossbows, take advantage of that increased maneuverability and the lightness of the weapon. Third tip, just always have a way to disarm. You never want to dry fire your crossbow. It causes a lot of problems, which I'm sure Craig's going to go into here in a moment. But just a word of advice from somebody who's made mistakes with that. If you're, or not, I haven't dry fired, but if you are planning on just bringing like a field point and disarming into the ground, don't do it near the parking lot. Don't like shoot into gravel, because you will just be tugging on an arrow for 10 minutes. So try and go find some like soft dirt out elsewhere. Just don't do it near the parking lot. So I'm going to turn it back over to Craig for a few ways to disarm.
It sounds like you had an experience with the gravel in a parking lot.
It was painful, truly.
So I've found 5 methods, and they all work equally well. One of the first ones we found were the biodegradable 2-piece arrows. So they're probably only about 12 to 14 inches long when you put the 2 pieces together. And from your elevated stand, you can take your hunting arrow off, put in one of these biodegradable ones, and shoot it into a stump. The arrow pretty much disintegrates, and it's biodegradable, so it just goes back into the soil. Recently, I picked up one of the solid heavy-weighted bolts. It's got a large steel tip on it, kind of a big collar, so it doesn't penetrate very deep into anything, whether it's soil or an old rotten stump. And that works out probably the best. I have not tried the screw-on weighted heads, but the idea is that they're not going to shoot a long distance. That weight's going to pull them to the ground and disarm your bow. The other thing that we've been doing is we have a bag target that's designed for crossbows, and we'll carry a field bolt, in our case. And when it comes time to discharge the bow, we'll set up the target, 10, 15 feet away, and just shoot the bow into the target. That tends to be one of the most common ways. Now, the 5th way on the next slide, manufacturers took into credit that crossbow hunters are going to want to disarm. So the large hole just below the cocking system in orange there is where you'd insert your crank, and you take up a little bit of tension on that, and with your thumb you would push that lever forward, and then you can uncrank slowly and let that bowstring up, just holding that button down. So the very first time I tried this, I read the manual. I thought I had everything orientated the way I needed it, and the crank slipped out from my hand, and the crank spun around and landed right top on my back of my hand. My hand swelled up. I thought maybe I broke a bone in my hand. It hit so hard. So you got to really hang on to that crank when you're doing this. But it's very convenient. You don't have to carry anything extra with you. The cocking lever is on your bow. The hole is there. You just take up the tension, push the switch, hold the switch down, and let it all the way down. And after you've done it a few times, it gets better. But that's probably the most safest way I've seen to uncock a crossbow. And anybody can do it. You just got to hold on to it good and tight. So next slide.
Yeah, so this last one is just to kind of wrap things up here. So I just wanted to add a little personal note at the end. And just to be clear, this is not affiliated at all with Minnesota DNR. This is just my opinion as a crossbow hunter. I have found that like crossbows do reduce the barrier to entry into the archery season in terms of just like the amount of skill it takes in order to participate, and the amount of practice you have to get in. So for new hunters and hunters that that you're trying to get interested in the field that may not necessarily have grown up around guns or are kind of nervous around them, this can be a really great introduction to shooting, and a really comfortable time to take them out in the field. So just wanted to add that note. Just keep an open mind with the new weaponry. But again, we'll be looking forward to seeing kind of how the season turns out and how people end up liking using the new weapon. So with that, I think we're finished here unless you have anything to add, Craig.
Well, we'll get into questions here in just a second, but give them a minute to write down our email address, send me an email, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. I think we'll jump into Carol's question here a little bit while we're leaving that stand up. But Carol wanted to know, are there any programs for brand new hunters where they can go hunting with more experienced hunters? So we currently don't have a mentored hunting program, but if you went to your local archery shop and talked with them, they might be able to point you in a direction, excuse me, and be able to gain some of that knowledge and experience from a mentored hunt with them. And the other thing I wanted to touch briefly on, this is a book put out by the National Bowhunters Education Foundation. It's called Today's Crossbow Hunter, and it's not going to show up on my screen. There it is. The other one that we've had some success with is put out by the Archery Trade Association, and it's the Crossbow Addendum. We have a number of certified instructors around the state that could use either one of these manuals and help you learn more about shooting a crossbow. Most of the archery shops that we visited when we first got into it would let us try the crossbow out. So we got to have more questions. Carol, come up with a follow-up.
I'll just add as a note to that about finding a mentor to hunt with. I highly recommend going out with multiple experienced hunters. That's something I did early on, is just went out with like friends of friends or folks just kind of in the community that I found through various like activities that I was already part of. It's helpful to kind of get different perspectives on hunting because everybody has like kind of different reasons they hunt. And it's just kind of fun to see how that plays out with your hunting experience, just to figure out what you yourself feel is the best way to do it.
So when my wife, she came and asked me the question, she said, you've taught hundreds of other people to bow hunt and deer hunt. She said, why haven't you taught me to shoot a bow yet? I said, I didn't know you were interested. And so we found out her level of interest and we got her starting shooting. I picked up a Genesis bow because that's what I use in the archery in the schools program. And she said, this is a kid's bow. And I said, no, it's an educational tool that I can teach you the steps. And her back injury a couple years later ended up allowing her to use a crossbow. And so I read through the manual and helped her learn how to cock it and shoot it accurately. And all of a sudden one day she came out of the house in her camouflage with her crossbow and she said, oh, did you want to hunt tonight? I'm so sorry. And out the door she went. And she still needs me to help field dress and drag deer, which is nice. Yeah, it was just something that her and I grew together doing. So I see we got some more questions. So we'll take down the thank you slide and we'll jump into some of these questions. So we've got from Shannon, can you cover the cost of getting into crossbow hunting introductory wise? And it's the sky's the limit. You can get into a crossbow for $400 or $500 at a real entry level piece of equipment. You could also go up to $1,200 and get one with all the bells and whistles and maybe even a little bit more in some cases. But you get what you pay for. The more you spend, the better quality I think you're going to get. So you can kind of do that. Or Morgan, what do you think on starting equipment?
My crossbow is a Wicked Ridge. I can't remember the exact model off the top of my head at this point. I love it personally,
Mhm.
really lightweight. It's also like
Yep.
very narrow. So I think like kind of figure out your style, but I mean, I was really intent on finding something that was like very maneuverable because I knew I was going to get into
Mhm.
tight spaces. So personally, I recommend kind of just if you have the ability to find anybody who already has like a crossbow or going to, like um I don't know if there's like a crossbow association or anything, but just getting the opportunity to kind of shoot these different ones before you make an investment in one, or just kind of holding them at the store too.
Right. And a lot of the shops have a small range where you could test fire a couple
Yeah.
just to see what you like. And that was real helpful to my wife when she got hers. Um, Carol said, I've never hunted before, so I don't even know what to ask. If you walk into a pro shop, if you walk into a big box store, um, a mom and pop store that sells archery equipment, um, the farm service type stores, sometimes they have them there too. And tell them that you'd like to get some information on crossbow hunting and what do they have and what do they recommend, and kind of take that with some notes, mental notes on what they told you, and go ask the next shop and just see what they recommend, and you'll come up with a plan of you know the size, the weight, the type of arrows, the type of nocks that they recommend, and that's not a bad way to get started.
Yeah,
How did you get yours?
how did I get my crossbow?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how exactly I got into. I'm not gonna lie, I was probably inspired a little bit by The Walking Dead, but so I had been primarily gun hunting before all of this, and I ran into a situation where I was spot and stock. Um, shoot, sorry. Is my uh screen still sharing?
Yep.
Oh,
So you just
my
want to hit
bad.
the carrot. There you go.
There we go. You good now? Okay.
Yep.
I ran into a situation where I was spot and stock hunting out in the Hoosier National Forest with a rifle and encountered a rather frustrating experience where I had a doe that was about like 50 yards from me broadside, and I could not move because she would have bolted, but I wasn't strong enough to, or not really strong enough, I just wasn't steady enough to hold the rifle without shaking, and I wasn't comfortable making the shot, and that was so irritating to not like have to pass up that shot because I wasn't like comfortable taking it because my weapon was too heavy. Um so that was part of the reason I like really started looking into crossbows in general, is just because I do like to do kind of the active style of hunting where you're actually out like walking
Moving
and
around.
potentially
Yep.
spooking things. So that was kind of how I got into it. But I did exactly what you did, or what you mentioned, Craig, is I went to a couple different stores and they did have indoor ranges. So another perk
Mm.
with archery equipment is you can just shoot it right there, and it's like pretty safe. Like they usually have
Yep.
a nice like safety area. Um, so it's not It's not necessarily like a gun range. So
Judy asked a really good question here. Can we recommend a starter brand crossbow, or should we go right to the ones you want? So as a state agency, I can't promote one brand over another. Um, I've mentioned a couple of different varieties. Um, like I said, my wife uses a 10 point. Morgan uses a Wicked Ridge built by the same company. I've got a Darton, and the last one we bought was one of the Ravens. And they all go up in price as you go down the list. And you're going to want to find one that fits right to you. If it's too long, it might get too front heavy. And if you're a vertically challenged shooter, shorter stature, you might not want to have all that extra weight out in front. The best thing is just to go and find one that fits you and your style of hunting. If you're going to set in the blind, I recommend a tripod so that you can set the bow into it, and all you got to do is hold it up to your shoulder, and you get much more accurate shooting that way. It's almost like shooting off a bench. But as far as recommending one brand over another, we're not really allowed to do that. And so I hate to give a specific company, but if you check out some of the ones that I just talked about, you can go to their websites and look to see what they have, and then go to a shop and see if they carry that particular brand. So that's a good way to get started. Mark says, what should I look for if buying my first crossbow, feet per second, etc.? Some of the bows out now are crazy fast, which means you're going to get a lot flatter arrow flight, trajectory to your target. I think the lowest poundage one we have is 300, maybe 50 in that first one my wife bought. And at longer distances, you can actually see the arrow arc from the front of the bow to the target. It's definitely the fastest bow we have. Will shoot an arrow straight to the target. It's just amazing how much power and speed that bow's got. And those are good questions to ask your salesperson. Try to find the most knowledgeable guy at the counter. Sometimes this time of year, they're hiring people just to fill spaces because they know they're going to be busy. And one of my biggest pet peeves is when the clerk tells me, well, this is my favorite. And, why is it your favorite? Well, I just really like this one. Have you ever shot it before? No. So yeah, you just personally have a affection towards the color, the style, whatever it is. And so that's your favorite. But try to find a reputable shop and ask questions. I'm not sure where you folks are checking in from today, but we reach far and wide with this program. But just find your local archery shops, find your local farm service stations, find your even some hardware stores I've seen selling crossbows now, because this is the new thing and everybody wants to have a product out there in case a customer wants to buy one. Okay, let's move down. So we've answered Mark's question. 300, 450 feet per second is a good range, I think. Benji answered the webinar. They're all recorded and it should be up probably Monday. Benji's usually pretty good about that. Are crossbows required to be cased when leaving the woods if after season hours? So treat it like you would treat any firearm. If it needs to be snapped, buckled, zipped, or tied, I do have a soft case over in the corner that I can show if you guys want to look at that. It's just got a zipper that goes all the way around the bow and secures everything up. For my personal bows at home, we went to hard cases for all of them. because just putting a piece of equipment in the back of my truck that cost, $600,000 to $800,000, I wanted it to be protected. How do you transport yours, Morgan?
I don't have a case just yet, but I do usually wrap it in a like soft blanket just to protect it, and usually make sure it's like secured. The other part of their question, like what is considered unloaded, um, I am pretty sure it needs to be like, um, oh my god, I'm blanking on what it's called. What'd you say?
Uncocked.
Uncocked?
Uncocked.
Like, is that? So you, I mean, the biggest risk here, I mean, one, you don't want to like have a weapon firing in your car, but also like you don't want it to dry fire either. So it needs to be in relaxed position,
Right.
not cocked.
And, walking out of the woods, I would take my bolt off of the crossbow.
Yeah.
And that way there's not a danger of a projectile being on the barrel or the riser. And when we come in from the field, we've got a bag target set up just beyond the edge of the yard where you can go over and discharge your bow into that. If I was vehicle hunting, I would use one of the other tools that I talked about where I could discharge with one of the biodegradable tips, one of the heavyweight arrows, or that's a consideration now, as you can find a crossbow with that decocking mechanism on them. And because I don't want to carry the poundage on the string any longer than I have to. And most of the cases that I have, you can't put a cocked crossbow into it.
Yeah.
So you'd want to bring an arrow and discharge it and transport it. I think the state law says snapped, buckled, zipped, or tied. So that case has to be fully encase the bow and has to be attached by some method. Could be Velcro, could be string zippers. All the hard cases have really nice locking latches on it. And we've hunted from Minnesota all the way into Texas with the crossbow and didn't have any trouble, transporting it in that hard case that seemed to really protect it well. And you've got all kinds of choices for what kind of scope you want. The one I've got here in the office with me today has got a there it is, a red dot sight, and it comes in red or green. And you'd say, why do I need two colors? Because different amounts of daylight are going to show those dots differently. And if you've only got a one color dot, it might not show up in a full daylight position. You got it turned on, but it doesn't reflect well on the target. We've gone to traditional scopes where it's a crosshair reticle, and they have different ranges etched into the glass. So you zero it at 20 yards, then use the next line down for 30, 40, 50. The key is having some way to judge that distance. So a rangefinder is a piece of equipment that you'll find in either of our hunting packs, because I got to know how far away I'm shooting. And if it's past my comfort zone of 20, 30 yards, I got to hope and pray that they walk closer to me, because I don't want to risk a chance of wounding an animal.
Yeah.
So let's see. Is there a good basic bow for beginners? What's a good brand to start with? And like I said,
I think we
I
answered that earlier.
I can't really recommend a company over another, but just go to your shops and tell them how much you're willing to spend and see what they got in that price range. And maybe there's features on the next upgrade that you really like, and you can make a decision. Do I spend the extra $50, $100, $200 more to get into that little bit nicer stuff? So
You're the blind hunter, Craig, so I think this next one might be for you. Can you cover rest for the bow in a blind?
So a tripod stand, it's usually got a V or a U-shaped yoke, and the forearm of the crossbow is going to set into that yoke, and that stabilizes the bow. So basically, you're just holding it from the rear, and you're elevating it up or down with the buttstock. And that I've used a wide variety of different manufacturers, and again, I shouldn't recommend what I use, but the Primos trigger sticks. The another good one is the Bog Pod. That you're going to spend $50 to $75 to get a good shooting stick and tripod, and it's amazing how much more steady that gun is, or that crossbow is, in your hand, because you don't have to hold the weight of the bow, especially if a deer's coming in, you know. What was the second part of that question?
I think you covered it.
Okay. They kind of run together here a little
I know.
bit.
I think next one's from Wade.
Wade. I see one from Hannah here, or Anna. Of the 3 types of crossbows, is there one that's easier to start out with as a new crossbow hunter? Again, your pro shop's going to recommend a real easy one to start with. This one here is a youth practice bow. It's not enough poundage for to hunt with, and you don't need any special cocking device. You can actually just pull the cables and cock the bow because it's so light poundage. We've got a loop here on the back that you would run a string down to the bow, and you could pull the handles up, and that would help you cock the bow. I really like the crank cocking. I think that's what you mentioned you had on yours.
Yeah, it actually has the hooks like built into the bow, which is
Okay.
super handy. I highly recommend that over like getting the ones where that piece is separate.
Yep.
Especially if you're not like, man, you cock it a few times and your back's gonna be worn out if you're just doing like practice shots.
Yep.
Yeah.
And some days going out maybe 3 to 5 shots is all you can manage.
Yeah.
But check around with your shop, see what they offer. If you don't like them because they're too heavy, too long, too short, I picked one up. A friend of mine asked me to mount a scope up for him on his, and this crossbow was just tiny. I mean, it was maybe 24 to 30 inches long, and it felt like this little toy in my hands. I didn't like the way it felt at all. I want to hold something that had some, and he liked it because it was light, and he's getting a little bit older and couldn't support all that extra weight. So the 3 types of crossbows, I can only think of 2 types. There's either a recurve crossbow or there's the compound, and I would recommend a compound over just a traditional recurve crossbow. You get more speed out of the compound ones. Okay, Wade says, how far of shot would you ethically take with a crossbow? And the paper plate is kind of the rule. If you can't consistently keep 4 to 5 shots on a paper plate at whatever distance, then you got to back up until you can. And I was hunting with a group of guys on an archery hunt, and the gentleman took an 80-yard shot with his vertical bow, and I thought, oh my God, that's like half a football, 3/4 of a football field away. And he practiced that, so he felt comfortable in it. I wouldn't feel comfortable in that.
Yeah, no, me either.
That's just, but he said I practice it a lot, and he said I knew I could hit. So he took the shot, and it was a nice double drop down deer down in Texas that he got.
Personally,
practice is the only thing that I can tell you to do.
Yeah, personally, I'm definitely deadly up to 40 yards. I'm working on getting up to 50, but yeah, I practice wise, I'm always going to be way longer distance with a rifle than I am a crossbow.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yep.
a, close range, and it's a close range weapon, and you need to take that into consideration when you're hunting, how you want to set up your spot too. I like to be like almost on top of trails for that reason.
Yep. Yep. And I treat it like I treat any vertical bow. I'm not going to set myself up for, like you said, a 75-yard
Yeah,
shot.
it would be
The
terrible.
last deer I shot was at 40 yards. It was a 6-point young deer. He was pestering this young doe and her fawn, and she decided she needed to leave the feeding area just to get away from these boys. And she brought him within 40 yards of my stand, and I shot him. And that ended her pestering and put meat in my freezer. So it was a win-win all the way around. Carol, it says, let's see, you must have a question up top here.
There's a lot of questions.
Don't know if you saw my question about using a rest for crossbow hunting in a blind. Like I said, I use the shooting sticks in the blind. You can adjust the legs out so that you can fit your legs between the tripod, or you can put one leg between your knees and the other two out in front of you. Especially in like a nice 5x5 pop-up blind, you got a ton of room in there. And I've even been known to take the kitchen dining room chair because it was really comfortable. my, my wife said, "Where's the dining room chair?" I said, "It's out of the bow blind."
Nice.
and it worked. I mean, it was a nice, comfortable chair to sit in. So I hope that answered your question, Carol. Anything to watch out for when buying a used bow? If I buy a used crossbow, I check out the limbs, I check out the rail to see if there's any wear or tear. I check out the strings, the cables. But I've been teaching archery for 18 years, so I know some of those wear points to look at. You know, talk to the seller and say, "Hey, could we go over to XYZ archery shop and have them look the bow over?" If you're not sure what to look for. Any loose strings on the serving. There's all sorts of parts that can wear out. Do you lubricate your bow before
Yeah.
season?
Yeah, I have like a kind of like a wax. I can't remember what brand.
Almost like a chapstick.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what we're talking about is, let's see if we can get this in picture here.
Does not like your background.
No, this rail here, you'd want to take that. It's like a small tube of chapstick, and you just put the lubrication on there, because your arrow is going to slide on that and your string is going to slide on that. And the more you maintain your equipment, the longer it's going to last for you.
Yeah.
The broadheads are extremely sharp. And
yes.
One day my wife went to load the bow and she touched one of the cables, and it actually frayed it just by touching it with the razor broadhead. So it's like, okay, now that's got to go to the shop and get looked at. Let's see here. Are there shooting ranges just for crossbows? Some ranges, some city ranges, I've seen where they have posted no crossbows, and it's a distance thing. I worked with one range that they had their archery range set up, and then the bicycle path was on the backside of the target bales. And it's like, this is no bueno.
Oh my God.
You can't be shooting arrows in that direction. And another one, the archery range was built on the top of a little crest, and the downward side was town. And if somebody shot over the top of the bale, that arrow would be just launched into space. And I said, you guys got to get some archery curtains up here to capture those arrows so they don't go sailing into town or into the bike path. And both of those ranges took my suggestions and fixed their range so that they weren't endangering any of the townspeople.
I've been
Uh,
I've been to a 3D range before, and
mhm,
I found that pretty useful just to get used to like shooting different kinds of targets as well. Um, I don't know if that was in a different state though, so I know they're out
yep.
there, but honestly, like investing in a target too, if
Mhm.
you have like anywhere that you could shoot on private property, it's well worth it.
So the crossbow bolts are going so fast that they actually heat up when they go into a styrofoam target. And there's a device that goes around the shaft of the arrow puller, it's called. Do you use one?
I don't think
And
so, no.
sometimes you have to twist that arrow back and forth to break the seal that heat caused in the styrofoam target. And a lot of 3D ranges don't like to get their targets all shot up. They want them to last forever. Well, if you're going to shoot enough arrows, they're going to get worn out. But you know, thankfully, I live in a rural area where I can put up. I got 2 or 3 3D targets, and I've got a crossbow target, and I've got a vertical bow target. And the the crossbow shooting into styrofoam going so fast it heats up and like seizes into the styrofoam. And so you need that tool to break them loose. And it's just called an arrow puller, made usually out of like a rubber material, and it clamps around the shaft of the arrow. And you want to start right up next to the target to start pulling that arrow. You don't want to grab way back here on the fletching area. You want to come right next to the target and pull that arrow straight. Otherwise, you could do that.
That's crazy.
We got a question from Jeff that says, "Are crossbow bolts reusable?" And for target shooting, I shoot them over and over and over again. And checking the shaft of the arrow for any cracks, any splinters, anything like that um, between shots is a good thing. For the hunting ones, if I shot a deer with it, I have seen the arrows bend and break
Yeah.
because as the deer is moving, it'll snap that arrow off. So of course those aren't going to be usable. And my wife has quite the collection of used bolts from actual hunts that she was on because we don't reuse them. But did you arrow break in half on your deer?
No, actually, the arrow that I used to shoot that deer was featured in the slides. It was whole
Okay.
and managed to
Yep.
pass through. I think the broadhead only nicked a bone because the broadhead was a little messed up.
Yep.
But I actually ended up retiring that arrow to be one of my practice
Yep.
arrows.
That's a perfect use for it.
Yeah, I don't really
Or
like
if it was
I don't
a hunt that you want to remember,
yeah.
hanging that arrow up on your wall,
Yeah.
you know, it's a good one there. We got a few questions left, Benji.
I was just
We
going to
get
say it's
most of them.
12:59. We are running out of time, so
Oh man. Kept us busy.
time flies when
Yeah.
you're having fun.
Yeah.
This is a great topic. If you do have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to Morgan or Craig to
I
try
think
to
we
get
only
those
missed
answered.
one. If hunting on public land, what's the best way to get your equipment to your hunting location? Your blind, your chair, you pack it in, take the kids' red wagon, load it all up in there, and cart it out into the woods, or find a really strong friend that wants to go with you and have them carry everything out.
Bring a couple of kids with you; they'll carry stuff out.
Yeah. Or deer
There
cart,
you go. A deer cart, yep, that'll work
multi-purpose.
too. Thanks everyone for being here today and learning a little bit more about crossbow hunting. It's exciting to get out there and spend time in the woods early like this.
Great. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Next week, Lindsay Chartel is going to join us to learn a little bit about woodcock hunting. So
Hey, I'll
it's
be
fall
back for
time.
that one too.
Yeah. Good deal. I hope everybody else can join us. So thanks,
Thanks.
Yeah,
everyone. We'll see you next week.
take care.